Well, welcome to each and all to Todd Talks, a bi-monthly webinar and podcast sponsored by and made possible through the church network of Baylor University's George W. Truett Theological Seminary. Today, our guest for the first Todd Talks of 2021 is another Todd, Tod Bolsinger, although he only uses one D to spell his first name. I don't know what's up there. Let me tell you a little bit about Todd, as if though you don't know him already. Tod Bolsinger, who holds the PhD from Fuller Theological Seminary, serves as Associate Professor of Leadership Formation, as well as a Senior Fellow for the Dupree Center for Leadership at Fuller Seminary. His books include It Takes a Church to Raise a Christian, Canoeing the Mountains, and now most recently, as we will visit about some near the end of our conversation today, Tempered Resilience, How Leaders Are Formed in the Crucible of Change. Todd is a frequent speaker, consultant, and blogger. He serves as an executive coach for corporate, nonprofit, educational, church organizations in transformational leadership. For 17 years before beginning at Fuller, he was the senior pastor of San Clemente Presbyterian Church in San Clemente, California, after having served for 10 years at First Presbyterian Church of Hollywood. Todd and his wife, Beth, have 2 children. Todd, it's a delight to welcome you. Thank you for your time this morning.
It is great to be with you, Todd. Very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Todd, welcome, and allow me to begin our conversation with a rather general question that I think will be of great interest to those who listen. And it's this: when and how and why did you become interested in reading and studying about leadership and eventually writing and speaking and consulting and instructing regarding leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I was a really young leader, I was asked to come on the staff at Hollywood Presbyterian at 23 years old. I was their college director. Lloyd Ogilvie, who went on to be the chaplain of the Senate, was our senior pastor. And he would talk a lot about leadership. He talked a lot about, and the way he talked about it was, he really was committed to be a preacher, but some men in his life, and they were all men at the time, who were in corporate America, really mentored him in how to run a good, healthy church. And so he really impressed that upon us at a young age. But I got to tell you, my emphasis of my life was really on spiritual formation. That's what I went and did a PhD in. That's what I cared about. But then when I was asked by another seminary to do a doctor of ministry on my first book, which was all about communal practices of spiritual formation, it was a book on leading communities of spiritual formation. And I came in thinking the class was going to be about spiritual formation and community, and everybody wanted to talk about the leading. This is the part that got me, was the students themselves kept saying, look, everybody's committed to wanting to be a disciple, at least they say they are, and they all want to live in community. The problem is that when we start trying to actually make the changes, they don't want to make them. And so all of a sudden, that got me interested in leadership. And then in my own challenges as a pastor, I write about it in Canoeing the Mountains. I just found that over and over and over again, the place of challenge was really in the leadership side. And that got me interested. And that's really become my calling and the place where I spend my time. I now lead the Church Leadership Initiative at Fuller, which is all about forming church leaders for faithful change. And so really that's my life. It's about leadership and change leadership and the formation of leaders in that way.
Well, we're grateful for that calling and your faithfulness in it, Todd. We've all benefited appreciably and measurably from it. So as you've done your reading and your research and your writing on leadership, I'm wondering, Todd, if you would share with us some of the folks that you have read and from whom you've benefited. Many people are reading you, but who are you reading? And why might we also want to read some of these folks?
Yeah, so those who have read my books know that the most seminal resources in my life are the work of Ronald Heifetz at Harvard University, who talks about adaptive leadership, Ed Friedman, who is deceased, but was a Jewish rabbi who wrote a lot about family systems and organizational systems. And then, and really the missional theologians, and really Darrell Guder himself was one of the most influential people in my own doctoral work. And so I was reading Darrell and the Gospel in Our Culture Network in the late 80s and early 90s. And so those folks have been really influential. I have to say that as a pastor, it was when I read Jim Collins that it re-sparked for me the notion of leadership in a really important way. I read his Good to Great many times, and that became very significant to me. And then there's Warren Bennis was one of the original people who worked on development of leaders, leadership formation, leadership development. And so those are some of the pantheon of voices that have made the biggest influence on me over the years.
So you all, as you begin to form your 2021 reading list, there are some titles to add to it if you've not already read those. Well, Todd, let's turn to your own work on leadership. When you wrote this very important volume from which I've greatly benefited, Canoeing the Mountains, you did so in 2015, or it was published in 2015. One could have hardly have imagined, I mean, in one's wildest imagination and notions, a year like 2020.
Yeah.
So adaptive leadership, as you note, is needed to navigate the rapidly evolving, complex, and unique challenges that continue to present themselves to leaders, including church leaders.
Yeah.
What possible leadership lessons garnered from 2020 might you note that we would do well to carry into 2021, which is starting, as we were noting before we came on, pretty much feeling a good bit like 2020.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think the most significant thing, Todd, was actually, so when I wrote Canoeing the Mountains, I wrote it in the summer of 2013 and this 2014, you know how the publishing works. It comes out
sure.
15. So if you just look at the titles, you realize there's no way I would have made a chapter title called The Mission Trumps back then. Because in 2013, I didn't have the idea that the word Trump would be as politically divisive or would be as symbolic to some people as it is, right? So by the time the book was out in 2015, within a year, I was already aware that the things I'd written about needed to continually be updated.
Yeah.
And that's what adaptive leadership is about. It's about when you are trying to lead in a rapidly changing world. And I think the only thing we know is that the only thing constant about change is that it's speeding up. We're having more and more and more of it.
Yeah.
So what this has taught me more than ever is that trying to predict the future is ridiculous. It is a worthless endeavor. And that's important to say because much leadership literature of the 90s and the early 21st century was about trying to predict and get out in front of trends, right? There was a famous Wayne Gretzky, skate to where the puck is going.
Yeah.
Well, that's almost impossible.
Yeah.
So what you actually have to do is learn a way of leading that learns in real time. And so I often say to people that what I learned in 2020 is you don't predict, you prototype. You don't think in terms of trying to get out in front of trends. You think in terms of how quickly we can learn and then adapt based on the learning. And that is a radically different way of thinking that's much more common now, like in entrepreneurial circles. But that's much different than the old corporate model that most of you and I, most of reading you and I would have done, in our days about in our student days about what leadership is about. So that's been a massive change in the last year.
Yeah. So learn as you lead.
Yeah. It's like I always say, you can't, you don't start developing as a leader until you're leading, and that's hard. And you have to learn as you go, and that's hard. And those are two things that most of us who, especially with a lot of initials after our names, we thought we'd do all of our learning and then we would go do our leading and we would lead as experts based on our learning. Well, now what's really important is you're actually learning real time all the time and not often as an expert.
Yeah, I mean, medical professionals would tell us as much, right?
Exactly. This is where we really are having to learn the complexity of the world requires us a humility.
Yeah.
That many of us, I mean, as Christians, it should be something that we're committed to, but most of us haven't been shaped in that way. We haven't been shaped for that kind of learning and humility that we need.
Yeah, and the ability to admit mistakes, right? And the transparency required.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Yeah, in the new book, I talk a lot about the vulnerability of leadership,
Yeah.
and about how vulnerable it feels. Like, leadership today requires you to stand before people and tell the truth about that we don't know what's next. We're going to do our best. We're going to gather together. We're going to build trust. We're going to learn as we go, and we're going to try to solve hard problems and be faithful to the mission that God has given us. But we don't know what's next, and we can't even begin to try to predict what's next. That's one of the biggest lessons of the year.
Yes. Well, Todd, let's pivot just a little, not a lot, because this seems to be an ongoing challenge, namely a climate of distrust.
Oh.
So where we encounter distrust and increased polarization, how can we forge relationships of trust with others, including those both within and beyond our own organizations, especially those who do not necessarily look or think or talk like us?
Oh man, I see. I think this is going to be probably the biggest challenge of the next season. It's the rebuilding of trust. And so if you think about this, that trust is built by two things. One, it's built by your competence. You show up and demonstrate that you are trustworthy. Yep. So I would say for a pastor, if you don't prove that you are trustworthy at handling the scriptures, of being faithful to our traditions, of caring for your people, all the things that they ask you to do, well, then no one's going to trust you when you tell them, hey, we have to learn as we go. We're going to have to go off the map. I always say that people have to trust you on the map before they will follow you off the map.
Fair enough.
But the second part of that is that you have to really be relationally congruent. And so it's technical competence, it's competence, but it's also congruent. And that means that you need to show up as the same person.
Yeah.
Which means if you show up one day being the person wagging your finger saying, I have got the plan, just follow me, I know exactly what to do, then the next day you show up and say, oh my gosh, we don't know what to do. They're not going to trust you.
Todd, you froze up a little bit. So they're not going to trust you. You were talking about competence, congruence, and then showing up, being the same person day in and day out, integrity. Yeah. So continue on along those lines. There you go. You're back.
Okay, so technology has been our bane today. Yeah, but those are the main two things. Being a person who shows up day after day.
Okay, you're back again, Todd.
Well, why don't we pick up? I think I might have said that several times. I'm not sure.
Okay, let's go to a new question. And in the event that you freeze again and you need to, Todd, log out and log back in, that's super too. Here's another thing for us to consider together. Every corporation, institution, organization, regardless, requires adaptive change and learning. Is there anything necessarily distinct about adaptive change in a congregation, a church, or maybe even an educational institution and environment? Anything kind of stand out in those spaces to you, Todd?
The most distinctive parts about adaptive change in a church is to think about the fact that adaptive change is always the adaptation of your core values.
Okay, you're back. Adaptation of your core values.
Yes, yeah. So getting really clear on what we're not going to change, what's essential, what's really important.
Got you again.
So this is so frustrating. I understand. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I keep checking all my links and they.
Okay, you're back, Todd.
Ah, yeah. Okay. So where would you like me to pick up, Todd? That's okay.
Yeah, so adaptation of your core values, returning to mission.
And in most churches, that's pretty hard. Most of us have a hard time agreeing on that.
Yeah. Hey, Todd, I wonder if it might be possible to log out and log back in, and maybe our connection will be a bit stronger. Hey, please do that. Hey, friends, thanks for your patience here. This is one of the beauties and one of the difficulties of doing this in real time. And so I see in the chat some friends. Harry Lucinet, when Todd listed those he read, the first person was from Harvard. I didn't pick up his name in his book. Okay, we'll go back there, Harry. Thanks, Drew, for your affirmation. And all right. Todd, are you back with us yet? No. He's just logging out for just a minute. Thank you all for your patience. More conversation to come, and grateful for your sticking with us here. Thank you, Tom, for your kindness. While we wait on Todd to rejoin the conversation, allow me to encourage you to take up and read. Many of you have read Canoeing the Mountains. We're about to pivot to talk about Todd's most recently published book, Tempered Resilience. And so that's where we're going. Okay, Todd, you're back. I see you, but I can't hear you. There you are. I can't hear you now. Todd, are you on mute?
I turned my mute off. I should be okay.
I got you now. Got you now.
Okay.
Sorry about the buffering. I apologize. And folks are hanging with us. In fact, we have more now than we did before there was a break. So, hey, Todd, could we kind of rewind and reflect again on the question that regardless of one's institution or organization, adaptive change and learning is required. How might this be especially true of churches?
Yeah, so one of the most difficult things of working with people in church is that everybody assumes that we all share the same deepest values. Many of us come from different settings where those now take on trappings of additional values. So one of the most important conversations in adaptive change, when things are really changing dramatically, is to get real. And that is a hard enough conversation for most churches. Did I freeze in the middle of that again?
Yeah, you're coming in and out, and it may well be, Todd, that we have to retool. But let's go ahead and press on just a bit, because I want to turn our attention to your new book on resilience. This is something that I know folks are really excited about learning more regarding. So your new book, it focuses on how leaders are forged in a crucible of change. And I'm grateful for your ability to take a metaphor and work with it, Todd. Would you overview the book, Tempered Resilience, and what inspired you to write the volume in the first place? And what do you hope the book achieves, Todd? If you could say, this would be my desired end for Tempered Resilience, what would it look like?
Well, so the book came because as I started talking about adaptive leadership around the country, what I found was I often had leaders say to me, I think I can learn to lead change. I'm not sure I can survive it.
Mhm.
What's really painful, what's really hard for most leaders is not how rapidly the world is changing out there. It's how resistant our own people are to changing inside our churches. And that is soul sucking for pastors. I mean, that is really demoralizing. And we see that actually even in the life of Moses in the book of Exodus, right? There's a moment when Moses says to God, if you're going to leave me with these people, kill me now. Like, just take me out. And I think that's when most pastors I know start thinking, maybe I could sell real estate. Maybe I could, or I always think maybe I could go like do trail maintenance in the national park or something like that, right? Because the hardest part of leadership is dealing with the internal resistance, the resistance of your own people to the very thing we say we're committed to doing. And that takes a kind of what I call tempered resilience. It is resilience that is also tempered. It is strong and flexible. It's not a sledgehammer, but a chisel that can participate in transforming a people. And so tempered resilience is really about that. What is the formation of a leader to develop the strength and wisdom and flexibility to be able to lead a people through their own resistance?
And so as you think about the book's end, aim, telos, what's your hope for it?
Well, my hope for it is that it'll actually start a formation conversation for church leaders. It's really what it's about. Like I always say that the way that I think that in many of our seminaries, we worked really hard at forming people who are faithful to handle the scriptures. And we're also really psychologically aware about the psychological needs of our people. We also need to develop the formational resilience to lead well.
Yes.
I mean, I was in Scotland and I had an older minister walk up to me and say, you keep calling me a leader. You keep calling me a leader. I'm not a leader. I'm a minister. And I read that and I could hear in his voice that he thought, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up to care for people. I love God. I love people. I want to introduce the people I love to the God I love. You're talking about needing to change people and change structures and communities and congregations so they can be faithful. I didn't sign up for that. And what I really want to do is say, this is going to be our task. This is our missional task. Yeah. And here's the formation process to develop the resilience to do that well.
Yeah, so like it or not, whether you wittingly signed up for it or not, this is what you're going to have to do. Yeah, and that's interesting, Todd, because you're right to kind of do seminary speak for a minute. It's true, we have focused long and hard on disciplines, particularly classical disciplines, matters of rigorous academic instruction. But on the other side of that coin must be intentional spiritual formation and all that entails in leading people and in leaning into one's own relationship with the Lord. Was it Richard Foster who suggested in the introduction to that now classic, his volume on spiritual disciplines, the celebration of discipline, that ultimately what we need are deeper people. Yes. And I gather probably more well-formed leaders.
Yes, yes. So one of the ways to think about this, Todd, is when I first gave my life to Christ, they gave me some spiritual disciplines. I didn't know what they were, but they said, the people discipling me said, read your Bible every day, go to church every week, pray. And I did. But when I became a pastor, I realized reading my Bible every day was not enough. I needed to do the deep study of Scripture to be a faithful preacher. And I think part of what I'm saying to leaders today is, in a rapidly changing world, you're going to need some spiritual practices, and you're going to need some larger practices to enable you to develop the resilience to lead people through their own resistance. And you're going to need to be able to cultivate the ability to tolerate feeling vulnerable and getting supported by strong relationships, and then having practices that enable you to lead well. And these are not the kind of things that we think about as traditional spiritual practices until we're in the middle of them, like listening, looking, lamenting, learning. And these practices need to be part of our repertoire and our formation if we're going to lead the kinds of faithful change that we need to lead in a changing world.
Todd, that's profound. So to see learning and leadership as part and parcel of spiritual disciplines, this could help frame it in a way that might even be more acceptable, palatable to your friend in Scotland.
Exactly. So I'll just give you one example. We know the power of listening. All of us who go through like CPE, or all of us who go through pastoral care, know that people need to be listened to deeply for empathy. So for a whole lot of preachers, the next step in your formation was to become a better listener. What we don't know is that listening is actually profoundly powerful in helping people overcome their resistance to change. Mm-hmm. If you lead through listening, people are more open to going where they are resistant to going. When empathy actually develops trust and attunement, which comes through listening well to people, where our brains literally start to fire together, accelerates change.
Yeah.
So as soon as we start recognizing that our empathy and our listening and our ability to walk alongside people is part of their process for their transformation toward their faithfulness in the gospel, then we'll understand how much we need to cultivate that change leaders are not just, putting a big vision and, inspiring people to go into the breach, but actually walking with people through their own fear and anxiety and resistance so that they can develop and change as well.
Yeah. Todd, this is a bit of a riff, but if you have a moment, I would love to explore something that I think that your thoughts and your comments until now really point towards. So leadership, it's often said, is lonely, and teamwork is absolutely essential. Talk to us a bit, Todd, about forming a team. What does this look like? And how will you know when you're actually beginning to get there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I put team in a larger context. I always said that especially if you're leading change, especially if you know you're having resistance, needs three types of relationships. You need partners, you need mentors, and you need friends. Partners are people who share the mission. And so partners really are the people who are your team. And the most important thing I need in a team is that we are so committed to the same mission that we trust each other, that we care more about the mission sometimes than we care about each other, because we might need to confront each other on the fact that we're about that, right? Yeah. I have to say, as a young leader, I often wanted to work with my friends, and I still love working. I become friends often with the people on my team, but there's a big difference between having someone who cares about me and someone who cares about the mission.
Yep.
So your partners are people who care deeply and with you about the mission. Your friends are the people who care more about you than they care about the mission.
Yeah.
My friends are the people who go, I heard you got another book out. Congratulations. And I go, yeah, you want a copy? And they go, nah. Nah. Congratulations. So glad you have another book out, but nah. Nah. I don't care, right? And then in the middle is what I call the mentors. These are coaches.
Yeah.
These are people who care deeply about me so that I can be faithful in what God's given me. This is This is coaches and therapists and spiritual directors and mentors. They're in the middle of that category. And I do think that for most leaders, I always say this, I think it is leadership malpractice to try to lead without a coach, a therapist, or a spiritual director. If LeBron James needs a coach, then you need a coach. right. If Tom Brady needs a coach, you need a coach. And so I just think that it's really important to recognize that the kinds of leadership. So my team has to be my partners, and we'll develop trust and friendship and camaraderie. My mentors have to want me to be better for the sake of my team. And my friends are people who care deeply about me, that I will continue to be a good, healthy, faithful Christian father, friend.
This is terrific, because sometimes, Todd, there's a tendency or propensity on the part of leaders to conflate your category 1 partners with category 3 friends. So you just hire your friends.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, this is one of the big things in adaptive leadership, is to know the difference between your allies and your confidants.
Yeah.
Right. Your allies, some of the people on your team are people that you may not be close friends, but you join together arm in arm. God has got you there. Now, the friendships come out of that. And I get a joy at this stage of my life to work with a lot of my closest friends. Yeah. But really, your partners are the people who care about your mission with you.
Todd, this is terrific. And I'm glad that our connection is stabilized. Really, really, really grateful. And so before I ask you to offer kind of a conclusion for us and then a word of prayer for us, if you wouldn't mind, Todd, can I pick up a couple of comments in our chat? We have some friends out here who are wondering a few things. So our colleague and friend, Harry Lucene, is asking if you wouldn't mind to repeat the leadership specialist from Harvard and the name of his book that you mentioned first.
Yeah. So Ronald Heifetz is the person. Leadership Without Easy Answers is his kind of famous book. He's got several others, but Ronald Heifetz is really the grandfather of adaptive leadership. And most of the rest of us have built our work on his work.
Terrific, Todd. And then another colleague, Tom Ogburn, is wondering if you might linger a little longer on identifying these core values that will not change. How do you communicate that? And how do you communicate what can change? I mean, another way of framing that question is, how do you ascertain mission and communicate this mission?
Yeah. So when we do a bunch of consulting work with churches, one of the things we do is we have them start with, let's set aside our aspirational values, what we think we should be. Let's start talking about who we are. And the way you do that is you actually do that by telling stories. Let's tell stories about the moments that we were the proudest of our church, the things that made us join the church, the things that made us, why are we committed? Why did I become a Presbyterian? Why are you a Baptist? What are those things, right? Tell those stories. What those get to are our actual values. And then what you begin to realize is your actual values make up your gift. This is where the Catholic friends help us a lot. They talk about charism.
Yep.
That within the larger Catholic Church, different orders have different gifts, different charisms. So Dominicans are different than Franciscans, are different than Benedictines. I often think every church needs to be really clear. This is the gift that we offer to our community. This is what is unique about us. This is what would be lost if we were not faithfully living out our mission. And get clear on that.
Yeah.
And when you realize at that point, then you realize there's a lot less competition amongst churches.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of reason for us to want to adapt, because we have something, it might be small, but something very unique to give to the mission of God. You and I know this, that I work at Fuller and you work at Baylor, and that those are two different contexts to be in a seminary, right? Yes. But we both have something to offer the larger church that is really different, and that we don't have to therefore compete with each other. We have something, and that we really want to adapt and be our very healthiest, best expression of that in a changing world. Yeah.
So this movement towards kind of a homogeneity is something that we should actually not yield to, but resist.
Yeah. Think of it as the identity. So I actually think of this as strong adaptive leaders have a strong sense of identity. It's an interesting it's identity and humility. I know who I am.
Yeah.
So I always say this, that every strong, resilient leader is grounded in something other than their success as a leader. You've got to be grounded in knowing, and I think this is where I see it in Jesus's ministry, right? When he goes to be baptized before he's done anything and is told, "You are my beloved son,"
Mm-hmm.
right? So we have to be grounded in something other than our success in leading. And that becomes our strength, because as we begin to express that identity, open to change, learning as we go, growing, now we have something to offer that is really unique and different.
Yeah. And to pick up this thread about storytelling, Todd, I've heard it said that leadership is storytelling and good leadership is better storytelling. So how do folks excavate these stories? You're a master storyteller. Where can folks look to find these?
Well, so I think I tell good stories because I come from a storytelling family. I have a grandfather who was an immigrant from Italy, and we told his story all the time. My grandfather's name was Guido Evangelisti. That's literally my grandfather's name, like Guy the Evangelist. And we tell his story, and I write down to, like, on my wall here, I have a copy of his signature of when he came through Ellis Island. Like, so we have these family stories we've passed on. And I think if you get used to telling your past stories, understanding that they're instructive for the future, then what you get to do is you get to embrace both your identity and also some of the pain. I mean, we have some painful stories too that we tell in sadness as warnings. And those stories really become a way of, I think of stories as well, Brene Brown said stories are data with a soul, right?
That's good.
So stories really are the DNA. They reveal the DNA of a healthy body or of an organization or of an institution. And so you tell those stories well, and you adapt those stories to the future. And your future is always resides in the healthiest part of your DNA.
That's so helpful. Well, Todd, you've been generous with this time. This has been a generative conversation. So close this out. I mean, what's on Todd Bolsinger's frontal lobe today? I mean, what's kind of weighing on your heart? And then be so generous as to lead us in a word of prayer as you conclude your thoughts.
I think the thing weighing on my heart is probably what's weighing on most of our hearts. I think we are in a moment where we are having to ask the question, how does the church stand as a faithful witness in a profoundly divided culture?
Yes.
Without even wanting to get into the debate about who's right or to whatever part, I just want to say that the church must be leaven for righteousness and truth in the world. It must be about justice. It must be about the least of those and all the things that Jesus said. And so what I want more than anything is for us to recapture the church as the place that forms people to be a witness to Jesus's light in the world. And that's beyond the political divisions and beyond the power moves and needs to be beyond some of the divisions that are now tearing us apart. And that's where I long for the most. I think the future has got to be about our recovering our unique witness as the very embodiment of Jesus in the world.
That's so powerful and hopeful. I remember Paul saying to the Galatians that he is like a woman with birth pangs until Christ is formed in them. This Christos formity, which Mike Gorman talks so powerfully about, is the need of the day.
Yeah, it's true. It's really true.
Yeah. Todd, thanks. This has been great. I'm sorry once again for a bit of the buffering, but we were able to kind of press on and carry through, and it's crystal clear now. And would you lead us in prayer as we close? We would really appreciate it. Thank you again for your time and your work, Todd. It's been a blessing.
Thank you, Todd, very much, very much.
Thank you.
Oh God, to all who hear whatever piece of this broadcast, may you speak to them and encourage their hearts to be faithful to their next step of leadership. Whatever context you put us in, whatever conditions that we are facing, whatever challenges are in front of us, remind us that we are your beloved children, that we are anchored in your love, that we are held well by your grace. We are empowered by your Spirit, and we are called to be the answer to Jesus' prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen. Terrific, Todd. Thanks again. Appreciate
My pleasure.
you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.